Welcome to episode 31 of the Revolution Nothing Less show. Today's Monday, October 26th, and my name is Luan, and I'll be hosting this episode today. So we're 8 days out to November 3rd, and Trump's regime is still working hard to steal this election. And as we've been underscoring here on the show, now is the time for everyone who wants a better future to be stepping out into the streets. As you can see, our usual hosts aren't here today. That's because they're out making the case for why people need to be in the streets to drive this regime out of power. And Andy's working with people to spread the mission of Refuse Fascism, and just was recently interviewed on another channel. And Sunsara has been on the front lines in DC, doing different actions with the Handmaids that you'll see later on today. This is a show about actual revolution, and part of what we're doing here with the show is putting revolution on the map. A revolution to put an end to the system of capitalism and imperialism that is destroying the planet and generating the oppression of people here and all over the world. A system that has white supremacy in its very fiber and which now is moving in an all-out fascist direction. This show is grounded in the work of Bob Avakian, who has developed a new understanding of how we can go to work on solving these big problems facing people, and who is right now providing a lot of direction to how to understand the development of fascism in this country and what we need to do about this now. So in this moment, the show is going to be putting a lot of focus to the mission to drive out the Trump-Pence regime that's been called forward by the organization Refusefascism.org. And everyone really needs to be focused on driving out this Trump-Pence regime. Voting in large numbers, yet recognizing that Trump is already stealing the election and won't be stopped just by the vote. And taking up the call Refuse Fascism has put out to be in the streets in massive numbers and sustain mass nonviolent protests to demand Trump-Pence out now. Even as today we are focusing up on this movement, we thought it would be important, and especially so for our new viewers, to hear from the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian and his message to the beautiful rising that happened just this spring for Black lives, titled Nothing Less, that presents the need and the goal for revolution and nothing less.
This is Bob Avakian speaking. To all those who have risen up so powerfully and are demonstrating to say no more after the murder of George Floyd and all the other cold-blooded murders by police, to all those who have drawn inspiration from this righteous uprising, to all those who have had the blinders forced from their eyes and have been provoked to think anew about what kind of country it is that we live in. This has raised the biggest questions about what is needed for people everywhere to live fully as human beings. An end to institutionalized racism and murder by police, nothing less. An end to any way people anywhere are used, abused, and brutalized, nothing less. We need a world without white supremacy and male supremacy, a world where no one is regarded as alien, a world without war, where people from all over the globe, with a beautiful flowering of diversity, act together for the common good and are truly caretakers of the earth. This is not just a dream. The possibility for this is being powerfully demonstrated in this uprising of the people, of all different races and genders, from all parts of the world, refusing to remain silent or stay passive while all this oppression and brutality goes on. To make all this real, we need revolution, nothing less. A strategic plan for how to make this revolution, and a sweeping vision and concrete blueprint for a radically different and much better world, where all this can become possible, can be found in the work I have done, including the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. You can learn more about this revolution and become part of making it a reality by going to revcom.us and joining with the Revcoms. We do not need to live in this world where so much of humanity suffers so unnecessarily under this system of capitalism imperialism that cannot exist without exploiting and degrading people, suffocating their humanity, and killing them without mercy. We can do much better. Don't listen to talk about how it can never happen. Look around you. What seemed impossible yesterday is happening right now. Revolution. Why should we settle for anything less?
So that was Bob Avakian, or BA for short. And to learn more about BA's work and the revolution that he's leading, visit the website revcom.us and check out some of the links in the description, and continue to follow the show. So subscribe to the channel and follow the movement for revolution on social media nationally at the Revcoms. We've been talking about the theft of the elections, and we've seen some of the bold actions being taken up by Refuse Fascism in different dispatches. And on this episode, we're going to take a look at some of these bold actions from the National Handmaids call, and we're going to hear a speech from Andy Z that was given in Los Angeles at the mass assembly just this weekend. And lastly, we'll see an interview with Sunsara Taylor and the journalist Jean Guerrero on her new book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. This past week, Refuse Fascism put out a call for people to protest the illegitimate confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett by doing bold actions, wearing Handmaid's Tale costumes to draw attention to the Christian theocratic future that Amy is a champion of, and to sound the gong on the real reason that ACB is being rammed through the Supreme Court, and calling on people to get into the streets to stop this fascist regime. At the center of this nationwide call were actions in D.C., including a group of courageous handmaids blocking the Supreme Court, and a range of other actions in sister cities, including Chicago and L.A. So let's look at what some of that looked like.
The most immediate danger of this confirmation is that Donald Trump has openly declared that it is part of his attempt to steal the upcoming election, to carry out a coup in the service of locking in place a fascist America.
Stop the confirmation! Stop the confirmation! Trump Pence out now! Trump Pence out now! At the ballot, in the streets! Trump Pence out now! Trump Pence out now!
You are here demanding justice. You are here demanding democracy.
That's right.
And let me tell you, what's happening in this building is not democracy. It is not what the American people want. And I am hearing from the people of Connecticut and all around the country how scared,
Why did you show up and legitimize the hearing?
how scared and angry they are. Why don't you just let me finish and then you can talk?
Trump is stealing the election right now. Trump is stealing.
I want to say to everyone who is here today,
and capitulated. Call out Diane.
we hear you.
Call out Diane.
You are the real people who will be affected.
The Democrats collaborated. The Democrats collaborated. You collaborated with this process. You showed up and legitimized a fundamentally illegitimate process. Donald Trump is stealing the election. He's putting Amy Coney Barrett on there. And people need to come into the streets. We need to be in the streets. The Democrats will not stop a fascist America. It is up to the people to come into the streets. No more waiting. Go to the ballot box and vote against Trump, but be in the streets because there is a fascist coup going on right now. There is a fascist coup.
We need to keep fighting. We are not done yet. We are not done yet. You are helping to save them.
So we joined because we understand that there is a serious threat to not only our human rights, but just a democracy overall.
So y'all were a part of the Handmaids contingent of Refuse Fascism. What did that feel like?
Honestly, it was kind of just like a string of emotions that waved over me depending on the speaker or the subject. It would go from invigorating and feeling proud of yourself, like you're standing for something, And then listening to everybody really drove home just the reality of it, that this is not dress up and we're here for a reason. And so pretty emotionally moving in some heavy ways as well.
Kind of just like submerging people into this reality, even if they don't know that. But it is this a theocracy that humans would need, where women are treated as breeders. Literally, the state is a representative, putting in place the Bible as law. We're in the theater process.
I'm Amy Coney Barrett, and this is the future that's going to become a reality when I'm in the Supreme Court. So keep working. Yeah, don't pay attention to what's happening, because the only way I'm going to be stopped is by people taking to the streets. And I don't see that happening.
These are my handmaids, and they committed a crime. They call me Aunt Amy, and you can call me that too. The crime is that this one thinks that black and brown people can vote. Can you believe that? That's illegal. When I'm in the Supreme Court, that's gonna be illegal. When I'm in the Supreme Court, contraception is gonna be illegal. Look at this one. She thinks she can use birth control. That's a crime. And this one had a miscarriage. Killed a full human being. That's the world I'm gonna bring into being when I'm in the Supreme Court. And the only way I'm gonna be stopped is with people out in the streets. But since that's not happening, we're gonna have more handmaids. Isn't that great?
I don't see husbands. Where are your husbands? Where are your husbands? Huh?
The future is with Trump and
I don't see your husbands around. That's illegal.
Amy Coney Barrett is a theocratic fascist who wants to send women back into the dark ages and LGBTQ people back into the closet.
We are gathering across the country tomorrow to make plans to get organized because the hour is late.
So today was, one of our very important marches. We're just days from the election, and this is RefusFascism.org. We are the handmaids, and we dress this way to remind everyone what could happen if Trump and Pence keep going. I've seen it trickling down. Then I've seen our rights slowly get just chipped away. And I am here because women's rights, my body, my choice, economic, social, climate justice. I just think that we all have to get out in the streets now. It's not good enough to just vote. You got to get out. Got to get out. I think it's a very powerful, simple thing to do. People know what Handmaid's Tales are. They know what Gilead is. And I just don't want to be living in Gilead. When I put on this outfit, when I put on this costume, I feel a little traumatized, and then I feel very strong. So it's an interesting dichotomy, and I just think that everybody out here for Refuse Fascism has just done a great job, and we continue to do the same up to the election and beyond. Okay, being strong is being out here, knowing what I want to get across to people, showing people in the streets who we are. It makes me feel strong that I can spread this word and be a part of something that is so necessary in these days.
All right.
Okay?
Do you have a message for people who didn't come out today?
Yeah. If you weren't able to make it out today, please join us this week. Pershing Square every day. Pershing Square every day. All across the country, they have different protests in different towns. But right here, LA, Pershing Square. Tell your friends and come and get out with us.
So you were one of the handmaids out at the protest today. What was that like?
I felt powerful today. It's the 11th hour. The 12th hour is Tuesday, November 3rd. So have a plan. Take 5 of your friends. Hit the streets. Refuse to let this terrible person steamroll our democracy, because it's already too late. So we need to get out there now and give that show of force, because when the masses gather, that is really the most powerful force in the universe.
So that was pretty powerful and right on the pulse of the moment. And I think people should let that sink in and be moved to act on that. So next we're going to play a speech that Andy gave at one of the mass assemblies called by Refuse Fascism that was given in Los Angeles.
Listen, you, all of us, we who are gathered here today are the catalysts. We're the spark plugs, we're the triggers, we're the inspiration and the magnets and the organizers of what must become hundreds and thousands and millions who take to the streets day after day in nonviolent mass protest, who, by our words and by what we do and say, and what we put on the line, that not one more day must this regime of white supremacists, of anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ theocrats, of xenophobic torturers of children and families, of police state bullies and murderers, of genocidal racists and anti-science lunatics who are killing the planet and hundreds of thousands of people by their arrogant ignorance, no longer should they be allowed to rule this or any other country. There ought to be a golf course in hell with a never-ending sand trap for such people. I want to leave you here today with 2 points to think about and to act on. First, the Trump-Pence regime intends to stay in power by any and all means, including stealing the election. And should they succeed, it will be a catastrophe for humanity. And I do not use the word catastrophe lightly. The recognition of this is what brought you here today. Second, the second thing you must leave with today from this talk, we must act now. Others have spoken of this. We must not wait until the regime actually steals the election, but be in the streets now, putting before the whole world the horror that this fascist regime is bringing and the rightness of our cause, and acting in every way we can nonviolently to stop it. To stop a coup, you need to act before it is carried out. We can defeat this if we dare to face the truth of that and to organize ourselves to meet this threat. Coups can be defeated, but not by pretending they don't exist, but only by sounding the alarm in ways that people will not ignore and then preparing people's minds and organizing them to act accordingly. So leave here today committed to act in creative ways that provoke masses of people to not turn away, but be inspired to act themselves and to organize others to join us and to be a part of the mission of the Out Now movement, which is, again, to act together and sustain mass protests to do what? To demand what? Trump-Pence out now. We must vote in big numbers, but if that is all we do, the outcome will most likely be disastrous. We need to put our hearts, our minds, and our bodies on the streets. We have 10 days. 10 days in which it is not an exaggeration to say that the struggle over the future of humanity will go into high gear. And that fight has begun. We are now in the midst of a rolling coup, a step-by-step theft, the grabbing and stealing of an all-out, blatant dictatorial power without any semblance of democratic or civil liberties by the Trump-Pence regime. This will mean a qualitative change in the world that we, that you, that everyone lives in. Right now, they are doing everything they can to deny, to purge, to make as difficult as possible, and failing that, to intimidate those who they fear will vote against Trump, Black, Latino, Native American, and many others. If on election day or the day after, if Trump is behind, or he loses. The regime has said outright, and they have shown in what they are actively doing, that they will do anything and everything to complete their coup and to steal the election. They will bullshit, creating the facade of going through procedures of counting votes, while in reality they will be working to disqualify votes. They will be sowing doubt and issuing threats from Trump, while their thugs take to the street. Their trump card, and quite literally so, is this nomination of Amy Coney Barrett that's scheduled to be rammed through the Supreme Court this week. Because their plan is to take this disqualification into the state legislatures, into the county boards, to then take it to the courts that they pack with fascists, and then go all the way up to the Supreme Court, where they have now secured a majority to ram through this election and bring about a theocratic fascist America. They have packed these courts with judges who want to return outright to the original Constitution, which objectively ratified slavery, didn't consider black people human, didn't give women any rights, and in fact justified the theft of the land and the genocide of the native peoples. This is what originalism actually is. The theft of the election is not just after Election Day. It is, as I said, underway now. But do not think that Trump might not win an election that he has already begun stealing. Do not be drugged by these opinion polls. Such a result would still be illegitimate and must be opposed. Fascism, all that has been experienced at the pain of cages, at the pain of concentration camps, all that has been experienced over the last 4 years is always illegitimate. And fascism is always illegitimate when it is brought to power, whether by fair or fraudulent means, and it's already been fraudulent. This, too, is another reason why Refuse Fascism and the Trump-Pence Out Now movement are calling for people to be out now every day. I began by saying that if the Trump-Pence regime remains in power, it will be a catastrophe for humanity, perhaps our very survival. Look, the world is in great turmoil now. Big power rivalries are sharpening. Regimes all over the world are facing acute crises, not the least of which is the COVID pandemic. It is unconscionable and of acute danger to have a pathological narcissist with no capacity for empathy who espouses a genocidal racist program to have his finger on the nuclear trigger with the capacity to incinerate the world. More, this anti-science regime that will likely soon include a Supreme Court justice who, along with Trump and Pence, denies the science of global warming, which would, if they remain in power, foreclose quite possibly the potential of slowing or reversing global warming and burning and drowning and the suffocation of life on this planet. The stakes are that high. It is an existential moment for humanity. The heart of the fascist program are three things: white supremacy, the hatred of immigrants, and the assertion of the most toxic male supremacy and subordination of women and differently gendered people through a theocratic fascism and form of patriarchy. And I will say this: what we have seen so far from this regime is but the tip of an iceberg should they remain in power. This is something everybody has the responsibility to contemplate and to think about and to act then accordingly. Donald Trump is, as the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian has said, a genocidal racist. Mike Pence is no different. Mike Pence and the movement that he leads takes the Bible literally. This is a Christian fascist movement that would impose a Handmaid's Tale on the humanity of women and LGBTQ persons. And maybe the sisters over here in those handmaid costumes can stand up for a minute. This is real. This is who they are. This is what drives the movement that celebrates vigilantes who murder people fighting for black lives, and so that black people are not routinely and wantonly gunned down in the streets by police and disproportionately killed by the COVID virus. What kind of depravity, deliberately as a matter of policy, orphans little children, 545 immigrant children torn from their parents who were seeking asylum from the horrific conditions in their countries that were largely made by what this country does around the world and in Latin America. And now they can't locate their parents. This is not a bad policy. This is not inhuman. This is torture, straight up. On top of the tens of thousands in concentration camps, detention camps on this side of the border, and the most horrific conditions in asylum and concentration camps on the other side of the border as the Trump-Pence regime throws people across the Rio Grande as so much human refuse. No one should accept this. There is no election that can or should tolerate this. And to be complacent in the face of this, to fail to act in the streets, to not do more than just vote, is to be complicit and to collaborate in a great crime. And this is not just invective and drama for a talk. This is real, very real, and it's going to get acutely real should we fail to act and do what we have to do. Then this is why we say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. That is what we stand for. Living this is what we must do and what we must be. We are not standing out here, the few of us today, to look good for ourselves, for our group. This is not about us. This is about the world. This is about humanity. When stakes are that high, you can't be worried about how few you are, but know when you're right and that you reflect what people are actually experiencing and feeling deep in their heart that they don't want to acknowledge, that you have to stand on that, and maybe the people will come if you continue to fight hard enough. And in any case, it is the thing you should do if you are to be a human being. And as I said, we are here because Trump is already stealing the election. We need to vote, but Trump will not be stopped just by voting. We are standing together to put our hearts and our minds and our bodies to this task, to the cause of planning, to protesting and organizing to drive a regime from power. And I have said that we are in a rolling coup, a coup that is coming to a head through the election. So what do we do, and when do we do it? Coups, which are the theft of power, are stopped, 1, when people plan and when they act before the coup. And 2, when people act together in the streets, forging the unity and determination through the hard work of waking up society to what is required in addition to voting. And 3, and most importantly, in so doing this, in being out every day, we establish before the world the righteousness of our demand. Through our words, and most importantly through what we do, we put forward a pole that represents, that concentrates the reality that millions of people feel and anguish about, and demonstrates in word and deed what must be done if justice is to prevail in the regime that is bringing a great disaster down on humanity. The people here all around the world is removed from power. This people must see from what we do, and they must see it now. They must see it going into the election. And let me ask you this. Is that not what Refuse Fascism did in front of the Supreme Court, putting on those Handmaids uniforms, and at the women's marches all around the country? The brutal, women life-denying Amy Coney Barrett, that Aunt Lydia, when that was put before the world. And what you did and what the women here who are wearing those uniforms did is still sitting in people's minds. Do not be deterred by what the immediate response is. People are having to live with you representing the reality that is to come. And the same goes for the cages. The next 10 days really can count to put the poll of Trump-Pence out now on the map, to compel, to inspire people to see that voting is not enough, to recognize that waiting until Trump actually moves to steal the election will weaken the forces of resistance, to see that if we start acting now, our side can gain initiative. We can be the story in the news now, rather than Trump's lying bullshit and QAnon COVID spreading rallies. This is what people need to see. We're not telling anybody not to go out now and organize people to vote and to help them get to the polls and to make phone calls. But if that's all you do, the story is these fascists on the news. There's no heart for our side. All of you here, and what we have done is giving that heart and seeping into the conscience of people. And don't underestimate the effect of this. And yes, what we're going to do today is talk about why we're doing this, how to do it, and how to get prepared for the next 10 days. We need to awaken and organize, as I said, hundreds and thousands to act now. Look, we cannot predict what will happen tomorrow or next week that could cause masses of people to pour into the streets. You don't know that, I don't know that, and the people who say it's not time don't know it either. We cannot even say for sure that people will act if and when Trump moves to steal the election. But what we can say is that if we don't prepare now, if we don't act now, that will weaken and politically disarm people to understand the enormity of what we face and why voting alone will not be enough. The Handmaids protests, the cages, the kids' shoes are all part of disturbing the air, making people confront what is happening in their name. And all this must be tied back to the demand of Trump-Pence out now. We also have to dramatize, and we have to act to defend the right to vote right now, and not let those who in their camouflage costumes and their very real weapons have threatened and murdered people for protesting to demand Black Lives Matter. We cannot allow these people to come out and intimidate people from voting. We must not let them sabotage and suppress the vote in counties where people like this live. This, too, today is preparing for the struggle that will come should he steal the election. If and when the Trump-Pence regime, with the backing not only of their MAGA thugs, but of the Republicans in state governments and the courts across the country, move to steal the elections, our struggle will include protesting and uniting with the demand that they not be allowed to disqualify and deny the votes that are for Biden. But the struggle to remove this regime cannot just be reactive to the moves of the Trump-Pence regime and the response of the Democratic Party of Biden to that. We, who represent the interests of the people of this country and around the world, must act in our interest, which is that the Trump-Pence regime must go. That is not negotiable. There is no compromise with 4 more years of a fascist America. For that will be a horror for humanity. Think about this. This is very important. We cannot just be reactive to what the Trump-Pence regime does and the reaction of that by the Democrats. You saw what that brought in the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. They rushed it through. The Democrats said, we don't have the vote. They hardly put up a fight. They raised some questions to do some exposure. And then they said it's a foregone conclusion. Well, I said this before, I'm going to say it again. It's not even in this written speech. But just imagine if there had been tens of thousands of people on the Washington Mall and in city squares all through that nomination, how might things have turned out differently? And I'm going to tell you this, it won't be any different if he steals the election and they say, let's let this county board decide, let's let this court decide, let's stand in front of this place, which we of course should do, and force them to be honest, shine the spotlight on them. But if we don't get out there and fight in our interests, which are the interests of humanity, to demand the Trump-Pence regime must go, they must be gone from power, and we will not be just reactive, we will be proactive. Proactive for the people of the world. So I'm going to close where I began. The Trump-Pence regime will be a catastrophe scarcely imaginable. They are stealing the election now. And we must intensify our efforts to make these next 10 days really count before the election and send a beacon far and wide that now is the time to act and not stop taking to the streets until this regime is gone. Say with me, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Now let's get busy and get to work. Thank you.
That was Andy Z at one of the Refuse Fascism October 24th mass assemblies. This is the exact argument that we need to be making to people, so definitely rewatch that and share it with people that you know. And speaking of which, some of you may have seen this already, but there's been a new interview that recently went up with Andy Z and John Iadarola from The Damage Report, and we want to appreciate them for having us on the show, and we want to encourage everybody to definitely watch this. So check out the link in the description below. Next, we're going to show two more pieces that we have before we end this episode today. And the first is going to be a song called The Borderline, which is sung by a revolutionary rock band, International. We've had them on the show, so you may have seen them before. This song features sampled vocals from a speech that Bob Avakian gave where he talks about the situation of immigrants crossing the southern border into the U.S. and the conditions that people get put in once they get here. And this is going to be a very powerful display, so people should definitely watch that and check it out. And second, we're going to be playing an interview with Sunsara Taylor and the journalist and writer Jean Guerrero, who talks about her new book, Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda.
There's a land, so I've been told. Every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline. And when it's time to take your turn, here's a lesson you must learn. You will lose more than you'll ever hope to find. And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the borderline.
Up and down the Rio Grande, 1,000 footprints in the sand reveal a secret no one can define. The river flows on like a bridge between our life and death. Now tell me who will cross the borderline.
And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, and you know it's too late to change your mind. 'Cause you paid the price to come this far, just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the borderline.
I'm very happy to be joined here on the Revolution Nothing Less show by Jean Guerrero. She is an investigative journalist, an author, and a former foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal and the Dow Jones Newswire. Her latest book is called Hate Monger: Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. Jean, welcome to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, I'd like to start by asking you just to explain the title of your book and what drew you to write an entire book on Stephen Miller.
Yeah, so I mean, the title Hate Monger, we had long discussions about using such a bold title to describe Stephen Miller, and ultimately decided that it was an accurate way to describe him, based on the private correspondence that I've obtained between Stephen Miller and his mentors, based on his years of demonization, either directly or through the rhetoric of Donald Trump. He's essentially the demonizer in chief, where he is, inserting graphic, gory descriptions of alleged migrant crimes into Trump's speeches. It's just really responsible for the hate mongering that you see out of this administration, whether it's against immigrants, whether it's against Black Lives Matter protesters, whether it's against, anyone who allies themselves with communities of color. That is Stephen Miller. And the way I got interested in his story is I was covering immigration from the busiest border crossing in the United States. I've been covering it for several years, both under the Obama and the Trump administrations. And particularly during the family separation crisis, I really started to wonder about the person who was crafting Trump's immigration policies. They kept talking about how the family separations were about law and order, about national security, that they were only targeting people who broke the law. But I knew from my experience reporting on the front lines that they were primarily targeting families who had broken no laws.
Can you talk a little bit about, in the human terms, I know you covered this, you interviewed families on both sides of the border. Who are the victims of these policies, and what does this actually mean in real human terms?
Well, the victims are, for example, Jose de Marfuentes, a father from El Salvador who came here after one of his closest friends, a police officer in El Salvador, was killed, and he and his family received death threats themselves because they weren't paying the extortion fees from the local gang. They didn't have the money to do that. And so they were told they were going to be killed. And so he came, with his wife and his 2 children, a 1-year-old Mateo and Andre, who was 4 years old. They presented at the port of entry, as is legally required. And, Jose was separated from Mateo. Jose was detained for 8 months without knowing where his 1-year-old son, Mateo, was. When they finally reunited, the father and son, because a federal judge had said that the Trump administration needed to stop these inhumane family and illegal family separations, the little boy was covered in lice and grime. He'd been kept in this tender age facility that was later closed for a number of alleged violations, alleged inappropriate contact between staff and children, harsh punishment. And the boy, it looks like he was subjected to that because he's had, trauma ever since. He used to be a very happy little boy, and now he cries all the time. And this is just one of hundreds of cases, more than 1,000 people who were separated from their children under this policy. Some parents were deported back to their countries without their children. It was just, and this is, this all happened because Stephen Miller designed this policy, knew that it was going to traumatize these innocent families and that it would deter further family migration to the United States from people who do not want to suffer the same fate as these families.
One of the cornerstones of fascism, and I believe we are dealing with the fascist regime and the Trump-Pence regime, is a sense of false victimhood. And taking those who are actually carrying out atrocities, carrying out violence, carrying out oppressive violence, and portraying them as the victims and portraying that as a just and justifiable response to being inundated by a swarm of invaders, or that the oppressed are the oppressors. And I wonder if you could respond. How do you think that that's accurate? Do you see evidence of that in this administration and in Stephen Miller's role in it?
I do, absolutely. And I think what we saw at the Republican National Convention, where the quote unquote cancel culture was this main theme, but what they're doing with that theme is they're lumping all critics of fascism, of white supremacy, under this banner of cancel culture to demonize them and to accuse them of shutting down people's free speech, when the people who are out in the streets, actually shutting down speech are the authorities, the state. You have Stephen Miller turning the Department of Homeland Security into a political weapon that has been used in Portland, for example, against anti-racist protesters and against journalists, snatching people off of the streets without explanation and eliminating their right to free speech. Meanwhile, the White House is talking about how there's this horrible cancel culture that is eliminating white conservatives' ability to speak, but the actual speech that is being eliminated is that of the critics of his administration. But as far as the links to fascism, I mean, all of the normal victims of fascist regimes are the victims that this Trump administration has decided to target as well. Journalists, progressives, immigrants. It's the same. It's the exact same playbook. And I mean, Stephen Miller was primarily motivated by white supremacist ideologies, but there's the same, the white genocide theory, this idea that white people are being systematically replaced by people of color, and that people of color pose an existential threat to Western civilization. This is an idea that Stephen Miller, read about in The Camp of the Saints, this extremely racist book that he promoted in 2015, that promotes hatred and promotes violence against people of color. And this apocalyptic thinking is also weaponized by fascist regimes to rile people up and to get, to incite violence from militias who are supportive of them. And this is what you see them doing right now, breathing life into the #1 homeland security threat in this country, which is right-wing and white supremacist extremism. They are responsible for a majority of extremism-related violence. And yet you only hear the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, talking about the alleged threat of Antifa, even though it's an imagined threat. There is no threat. There's no, there's been maybe one recorded homicide from Antifa in the past several decades, whereas, right-wing extremists are responsible for more than 90% of extremism-related violence. But the reason you see this silence about the real threat is because Stephen Miller has inverted the hierarchy at the Department of Homeland Security so that most of the top positions at DHS are either vacant or held by people in acting capacity. And this is deliberate so that, any dissenting voices, national security experts, people who oppose what Stephen Miller wants for reasons of protecting the American people they've been transferred out, they've been eliminated, and now the only person really in charge is Stephen Miller.
I want to go back to the title of your book. I have just a couple questions left. Hate Monger, and I think it's an important identification. I think it's important to call it that, and you do a lot to kind of unmask beneath the talk of heritage, beneath the talk of economic policy, beneath the talk of national security, is a white supremacist core. I wonder if you could
Absolutely.
just, back that up a little bit for people.
Yeah, so one of the things that Stephen Miller's mentor, David Horowitz, taught him to do is to launder these white supremacist ideas through these other narratives about heritage and national security and economics. But at their core, they're white supremacist ideas because they're drawn from think tanks that are meant for population control for non-white people. And I called my book Hate Monger because, as journalists, it's very important that we be neutral. It is one of the reasons that journalism is an integral pillar of democracy, objectivity and journalistic neutrality. So we wanted to be very careful about the title, and we had very long conversations about it. And ultimately, we decided that, I'm not writing this book to tell readers that Stephen Miller has hate in his heart. But what I am telling you is that, because I've never looked inside of Stephen Miller's heart. I've never looked inside of Stephen Miller's head. I've spoken to people who've had conversations with him and have more than 100 people who knew him and have been able to draw my conclusions that way. But what I can tell you is that Stephen Miller is fluent in the language of hatred. He directly communicates with people who hate. He deliberately incites hatred. And this goes back to, strategy papers that I have looked at. David Horowitz sent Stephen Miller a strategy paper in 2013 about how the Republican Party needed to remake itself around demonization. Specifically, talking about how Obama used hope to win in his elections, and the Republican Party needed to use fear because fear was a much stronger emotion than hope, according to David Horowitz. He talks about the political utility of hate and other hostile feelings and says that the Republican Party needs to focus on appealing to voters' base instincts. And this is an idea that Stephen Miller ran with from 2013 forward. It is how he helped Trump win election in 2016, riling up white fear. This is, these are established facts. And so we felt that it was accurate and important to call the book Hate Monger, because Stephen Miller has been hate mongering for his entire career and deliberately and consciously, and it needs to be called out.
Do you think that people are understanding that adequately?
No, not at all. I think that we've had a massive failure in our national media, whether it's left-leaning or right-leaning. I think that there's been real complicity in newsrooms across the country. There's been a real reluctance to call the white nationalist agenda by its true name. We need to call things what they are, and we have the documents, and I think that imperative that we call these things what they are, because it's, it's extremely dangerous. It leads to things like what we saw in El Paso last August, where 23 people were killed by someone who thought he was saving this country from a quote unquote Hispanic invasion, a language that Stephen Miller inserts into Donald Trump's speeches and which he pulls directly from white nationalist literature. There's that book that I mentioned earlier, The Camp of the Saints. It talks about how the white world is going to be destroyed by brown people described as monsters and beasts, in large part because of the help of their anti-racist allies, who are described as agitators and anarchists and mobs who want to destroy this country. That is the language that Trump is using in 2020 to try to win re-election. It is language that comes straight from this white nationalist book called The Camp of the Saints that Stephen Miller promoted in 2015. These are facts, and they're missing in our national conversations.
Okay, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to share or reflect on?
I just think it's so important that people educate themselves and educate people around themselves about white nationalism and white supremacy, white supremacist ideas and fascism and how they work. I mean, I, as a journalist for a very long time, when I would hear people talk about the Trump administration as a fascist regime, I would just kind of roll my eyes and be like, that's extreme. But then when you begin to read about how fascism works, it's undeniable that these are the tactics that the administration is using. And as far as the white supremacy, I mean, there's this tendency to think about it as dog whistling. And I, personally thought about it and characterized it as dog whistling for a long time, but it's not even dog whistling. Like it's the tactics are directly pulled from white nationalist propaganda, white supremacist propaganda playbooks. There's barely any laundering taking place anymore. It's almost straight from these playbooks. And I think that the only way that we're going to inoculate ourselves, protect ourselves, protect our democracy is by, using information and making sure that other people are armed with information as well.
Well, Jean Guerrero, I want to thank you for coming on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Great. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
So that's the end of this episode, and we'll see you later. Remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for updates, and we'll be continuing to upload dispatches from the show during these times. And once again, get involved. Take to the streets in your city and sign up with Refuse Fascism at Refusefascism.org. This is a moment where what we do really matters, and what we do can change the direction of things, so we need to make waves now. So until next time, see you in the streets.